This episode of the Zelos podcast is sponsored by Perform Better. Perform Better is the leader in functional training by supplying innovative products and top-notch education to trainers, coaches, and therapists. Check out the brand new Perform Better app, designed for professionals who want to stay on top of their game. This free app features education from the world's best. You'll learn from industry leaders including Mike Boyle, Gray Cook, Sue Falzoni, Charlie Weingroff, and many more. Topics range from strength and conditioning, program design, nutrition, business, and marketing. Just go to performbetter.com. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Zelos podcast. I'm Rocky Snyder, and in the house is Emily Zaler. Now, Emily is, like myself, she's a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA, which is the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And here I am in a little studio in Santa Cruz, California. Yeah, I'm living the life. I like to snowboard and surf, and it doesn't get any better, but she's got a job that I'm kind of a little jealous of. She's the assistant strength and conditioning coach for the Denver Broncos. How about that? Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor to be here.
Well, the honor's mine. I mean, this is cool. Yeah, we can talk about, breaking the glass sideline or ceiling or however you want to say it, and getting women into the NFL is awesome. Not only are we going to have, by the time this airs, the Super Bowl has already happened. And in that time, we have had 2 female coaches with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and 1 female NFL referee out there on the field. So I just love the fact that the doors are opening, and you're one of the names that's helping to open it for more people. So I guess let's just talk about that. Let's just talk about the elephant in the room, and then I want to hear all about some other stuff. But how is it that you became a strength and conditioning consultant or coach, strength and conditioning coach for the Denver Broncos?
Yeah, so before we get into my specific journey, with the Denver Broncos, I do want to go back and touch on what you said about the 2 coaches, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because they're 2 women who I've looked up to, prior to my time in the NFL, and they're 2 women that, I had reached out to along the way, and they're, a big reason of why I didn't give up on my dream of working in male professional sport is because I saw that they were already doing it, and that showed me that, it really was a possibility for me, and to not give up on that dream. And so I hope, following in their footsteps, that I can hopefully be that vision, for either little girls or other women, within the field that do want to work in male pro sport and don't necessarily think it's possible. But now that there's more and more of us that are doing it, hopefully that allows them, to see it. Just like MJ and Lowe with the Buccaneers, allowed me to see it. So I couldn't be more excited for them.
Yeah. And my daughter is just an example of that. She was in high school football. She's finishing up and graduating this year. Unfortunately, no season this year, but the last 2, she was on the field with the rest of the guys. Only
That's
one.
awesome.
So, there are the young athletes that are seeing what you professionals are doing at that level. And where she wants to go with this is, of course, athletic training and strength conditioning. So you're leading the way. You're not the only one, of course, but you're definitely there. So kudos to you.
Thank you. That's awesome about your daughter. If that was an option when I was in high school, I definitely would have played football.
Yeah, but you did well. She played soccer also, and she was
Okay.
She was a goalkeeper. You were a keeper too, weren't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Now, where did you go to school? Because we'll get into the Broncos stuff in a second. But where were you a goalkeeper?
Man, so my story in college is a little bit, not a traditional path. So I started out at University of Oregon and was there my freshman year, and then transferred to University of Missouri. I was at Mizzou my sophomore year, ended up getting hurt at Mizzou and can no longer play, but had an opportunity from there to transfer a second time, and finish school at Arizona State, but to spend 2 years as an intern at the original Athletes Performance before it became Exos, and kind of get a jump start on my career. And so, I chose to do that.
What year was that where you were at API?
2008 to 2010.
Oh my gosh. I honestly think that I might have gone through the doors while you were interning there. Great facility. For those not familiar with Athletes Performance Institute in Arizona, Mark Verstegen was the one who started it. And basically, you want to talk about the who's of athletes that train there in the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, I mean, even NASCAR. You'll have a whole bunch of athletes go through that program. What a great platform to launch from. How was that?
Yeah. It was an amazing experience. Like you said, I couldn't have asked for a better opportunity. And while I was at Mizzou, Dr. Brian Mann was my strength coach for our soccer team.
Okay.
And Dr. Mann, said, "Hey, Em, I know you're done, your playing days are over." And I did have an opportunity to stay there as a team assistant and keep my scholarship. But Coach Mann at the time, he knew that this is the field that I wanted to go into and said, "Hey, if I can get you connected to an internship at Athletes Performance, would you be interested in that?" And so I jumped all over it. And it was really during that experience that solidified that this is what I want to do. Um, and working at the professional level became the long-term goal for me, a decade ago. So
Fabulous. Hey, you got your certification as a strength and conditioning coach at that time too?
no, so
Oh,
so yeah, so a little bit of like a plot twist. It definitely has not been a linear path. So after that experience at Athletes Performance and after I got done with undergrad, I somehow ended up working more with General Pop for a few years. And at the time, I thought it was going to be very temporary. Ended up having a lot of success with it and kind of stayed in that realm, working with athletes, a handful of athletes, but mostly with General Pop and running training departments for Lifetime and different big fitness companies. And I kind of had a realization 4 years ago now, like, what am I doing? This isn't, this is great, but this isn't the big picture. This isn't the long-term goal. And so I put together a plan. And at the time I didn't have my CSCS, I didn't have my master's. And I knew that, hey, if I really want to go after working in pro sport, I need those two things, to even have an opportunity to do so. And so from there, obviously became certified, as a strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA, and got my master's in applied exercise science, strength and conditioning through Concordia, Chicago.
nice. So you say general pop, right? We're talking everyday people coming in and personal training or exercise instruction. It's a completely different world
Yeah,
compared to training actual professional athletes whose job it is to train, or a big part of it, a big component, not only how they perform on the field, but how they train on and off the field in the weight room. They are so much more compliant. So in some ways, I'm not going to say you have an easier job now by any stretch of the imagination, but it's really hard to periodize programs for general population because that is not their goal. So it must have been just like, oh, I have found what I want to do when you switched over into the professional sports realm, I imagine.
yeah. So like you mentioned, working with Gen Pop is very different than working with professional athletes. And I do feel like there are a lot of, skills and things that I've been able to translate during my time, working with General Pop and during my time running training departments, managing a staff of 40 coaches, working with different personality types. Those are all have become a skill set that I definitely feel like has helped me have success, at this level when you're working with, different personalities, amongst a team. And um, but prior to getting back into the pro level, or kind of getting my foot in the door, I did spend time at UCSD in San Diego as well. Um, so went from Gen Pop back to the collegiate setting, and then had an opportunity with the Knicks, and then that led me here to Denver. So it's been a
Well, wait,
journey.
so you were in San Diego and somehow you landed in New York City,
Yes,
being a strength coach with the New York Knicks. So
correct.
okay, so where was that jump? I mean, I don't think there's a San Diego, New York strong connection there. At least I haven't heard of it. How the heck did that happen?
Yeah, so it was during my time at UC San Diego, and that was right around the time after I became certified through the NSCA and finally, got my CSCS, and began as a volunteer at UCSD because I knew that I needed to gain more recent experience working with athletes after spending, the last few years prior to that working with, everyday people. And so it was during that time that part of my plan essentially to try to break in to the professional sports world was just blindly reaching out to strength coaches within the NBA, within the NFL, just putting myself out there, asking about, potential internship opportunities or anything that, they were willing to offer. And I didn't expect, to get many responses at the time. And turned out I got a handful of them, and New York was one. And that kind of led me, to that opportunity as a seasonal assistant strength conditioning coach with the Knicks during the 2019-2020 season.
It's interesting because if you for other industries, if you have the leaders in the field and you are entry level, let's say, it's very hard to connect with those. But
Yeah.
fortunately for our industry, it's not quite the same. I mean, everyone wants to share a certain amount, and we all started at the ground level and know how hard it is to move on up. So those that are in those positions are so much more willing to be open to see who's coming by. So for me, Emily, it doesn't surprise me that you got more than just one offer from the Knicks. Every time I reach out to strength and conditioning coaches, whether it's the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, more often than not, they reply right back and they say, "Oh yeah, what's going on? I'd love to learn more about what you're doing." So it's almost surreal in a way, because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but growing up with professional sports and watching them on TV, you think there's no way these guys are going to want to talk to
Right.
me, right? But suddenly they're like, "Of course, yeah. What are you
Yeah.
going to do?" So that's so great. So how long were you with the Knicks?
So I was with the Knicks. I moved to New York at the start of the 2019-2020 season, so just this past season.
Oh, how
Um,
wonderful. What timing was that?
yeah.
Could you have planned it any worse? Oh my gosh.
So moved to New York in September of 2019 and was there for training camp and for our season, and then suddenly COVID hit, and I remember the exact day, March 11th of 2020, that the NBA season was suspended. And at that time, you know we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if it was going to be for a couple weeks or longer than that. We had no idea that it would turn into what we're dealing with today. And so during that time, we were waiting essentially, is our season going to resume? Is it going to be over? There was talk of the NBA bubble starting to develop, and it probably wasn't going to be all the teams. Only the top 22 out of the 30 teams were going to be in the bubble, and unfortunately, we weren't in the top 22 at that point in the season. So I kind of, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, you couldn't have timed that any worse, but I tried to look at it from, I had two mindsets and two perspectives, that kind of ways I could have gone with it. One way would be thinking like, poor me, I finally made it to the pro level, which has been my dream. And now our season got shut down, and now, what am I going to do? But I chose to kind of go about it and try to take the approach of what can I do to make the best of this situation, and use this experience with the Knicks and use it as leverage, to hopefully gain experience in another professional sport and continue to develop my skill set as a coach. And so, being that I had some success when I reached out to NBA teams, I knew that NFL training camp was starting, towards the end of the summer. And at this point, a lot of us ended up getting furloughed with the Knicks because we were done. There wasn't anything going on, which
Yeah.
I completely, understood. And so decided to contact every single head strength and conditioning coach within the NFL, and kind of said, "Hey, here's a situation. I was working with the Knicks. Our season, as you probably know, has been suspended, and I would love to gain experience working in the NFL. Is there any opportunity for me to volunteer my time during training camp? And the first round of emails, I got a couple responses back, but not too many. But I created a spreadsheet to kind of track all the days I reached out, who responded, who didn't, setting reminders for follow-up days, that type of thing. So it was really organized, and that helped me out a lot. And it was after that second round of emails reaching out to coaches that I actually heard back from 27 out of the 32 teams, not necessarily with, hey, come work for us, but at least with, hey, this is, we so impressed that you took the time to do this, and we don't have anything now, but we're going to keep your resume for the future. That was a lot of the responses, but just the fact that they took the time, to have that conversation with me, really kind of gave me hope, for the future of women, within the field, especially.
Yeah.
And then there were a handful of teams that, said, hey, let's talk, about training camp opportunities, et cetera. And so at that same time, I learned about something called the Bill Walsh Diversity Fellowship, which is a
Yeah.
program through the NFL that allows minority coaches as well as women to gain experience, with an NFL team during training camp. And so I ended up, during that process, you can list the top 5 organizations that if you were selected for the fellowship of who would be your ideal top 5 teams that you'd want to work for. And so I listed Denver, as my top organization, primarily due to Coach Lando and his reputation in the field. And I thought he'd be someone, great to learn from and to work with. And so that's kind of long story, how I ended up in Denver for camp.
That's fantastic. And your story, there's some commonalities with a lot of the other strength coaches in the professional world of sports that I've spoken to, and asking, how they got to where they were. And some things just continually ring true, which is volunteer, look for internships wherever I need to go, whatever I need to learn, be willing to go wherever they send you. And it sounds like exactly like from Oregon to Missouri to San Diego to New York, then to Denver. You went all across the country, following your passion and your pursuit. And what a great story that is to have such I won't say a happy ending because you're continuing with this, but a happy stopover point, at least
Yeah.
right now. How is it comparing in the time that you had with the Knicks? Granted, it wasn't a full season. I'm sorry they didn't make it to the playoff bubble. My team did, but they didn't last that long either. But we won't talk about that too much. I've talked about the previous episodes with the Lakers guy there. We won't talk about Ed very much right now. But anyway, how is it comparing training the NBA players to the NFL players? Obviously, the number of players on one team is so much bigger than the other. But when it comes down to it, the nuts and bolts of it, how much of a difference is it?
Yeah. So I think the biggest difference for me and the biggest adjustment at first was just like you said, the sheer number of players, on an NFL roster compared to an NBA roster. It's 4 times the size, if not a little bit more. And so I think coming from the NBA, when you're in that more intimate setting, with 15 to 20 guys, and then now all of a sudden you have 80 guys, it just takes longer to establish those relationships with each athlete, individually, and to get that time with each person, one-on-one, for them to really get to know you, and for you to get to know them, and what their specific, needs are. But then obviously the demands of the sports are very different, as far as, movement qualities, and demands on the court compared to on the field. And so training from a programming perspective, does look different as well.
Oh, I imagine. I mean, because if you're a point guard or you're a center, you still need to do basically the same thing. Work on your shots, work on endurance, your speed down the court, your vertical jump. All those things are they're going to be a little bit different here or there. But with a football team, first of all, who knows who's getting traded and who's coming up from the practice squad, who's going back down. The continual changing of 80 players in and out has got to be a big challenge. And on top of that, now you're dealing with D-backs or the punter and kicker, the QB, the cornerbacks and the running backs. I mean, all these programs are going to have to be tweaked considerably compared to the NBA. How does that work? Obviously, you've got spreadsheets. You're not by yourself. You're the assistant strength conditioning coach. How does that all work?
Yeah, so great question. You know, we have a staff of 5 total within the strength and conditioning room, I guess you could call it. So we have our head strength coach, Lauren Lando, and then there's 4 of us assistants on staff. And so Coach Lando does the majority of the programming for different position groups. And then as a coaching staff, obviously, you know, we're all on the same page and speaking the same language, you know, as far as what is necessary for different positions and how we're going to run things. And doing all that during COVID, you know, definitely threw, you know, a few more curveballs at us that it's a good thing that we do have a total of 5 coaches on staff, so we were able to manage that situation.
Yeah, what were the major accommodations that you had to deal with in regards to the COVID restrictions? How did you work around that? I mean, that's because, I mean, the NFL is probably, I won't say untouched, but it was the least gravely affected through this entire past season. You weren't in a bubble. You didn't have to stay in one city. Definitely, you didn't have fans in many of the arenas, but when it came to actually training the professionals, how did it change for you?
Oh man, you know, it changed. You know, it feels like it's normal for us now, but looking back, you know, it's hard to remember what it was like before COVID. But the NFL did issue some pretty intense guidelines, and we were fortunate enough where our weight room, we have glass doors in the middle of it that close completely. And so we were actually able to create 2 weight rooms within our 1 weight room. So with those glass doors closed, we had weight room 1 and weight room 2 because there were guidelines issued from the NFL that only 10 players could be in a weight room at one time. So you think about 80 guys, and now we can only have 10 players in the weight room. And so we were fortunate, we were able to close those doors and operate as 2 separate weight rooms. So we were able to have 20 guys total, you know, if there was a pre-practice lift, we'd have 10 guys in one room, 10 guys in the other with our coaches. We were separated between the 2 weight rooms as well, where a lot of teams had to build an outdoor weight room or just move a bunch of equipment outside under a tent, you know, in order to comply with the guidelines and get it done. So a lot of it was scheduling, you know, with the guys and making sure that we were able to get everyone in. And during training camp, you know, that meant a lot of times we have 3 back-to-back lifts, you know, so 20, 40, or 4 sometimes to get all 80 of them in, or 1, you know, 1 lifting time before practice and then 3 after practice, where we're just going, you know, straight through, you know, on the hour essentially, with different guys coming in. But then between every session, we have to do deep intensive cleaning, you know, before the next group can come in. And so it's been an intense process, but again, it feels normal now. Aside from that, you know, things that you don't think about until you're kind of put in the situation is sharing equipment, you know, sharing dumbbells, sharing barbells, sharing benches. You know, none of that could happen having players spot each other. We weren't allowed to have any athletes spot each other. It had to be anything that needed spotting with a coach. So we were running around the room, you know, trying to spot anyone that needed spotted. Or if you're doing like a Nordic hamstring curl, for example, you can't have a player hold the other player's legs, anything where there was contact. And so what we ended up doing, and Coach Lando did a fantastic job kind of getting this organized, and this was before I got there, he created like stations essentially within each weight room where there was a squat rack, dumbbells, bands, you know, benches, anything that that athlete is going to need during that session, where, hey, if you were coming in, hey, Rocky, you're at rack 1 today, you're at station 1, and then everything is your own, so there's no sharing of any kind.
Yeah. Wow. I
So
was just thinking, yeah, that's a tremendous undertaking, and it caused you to start your day probably a lot earlier
yeah,
than you normally would, because you've got more than just one group to get the pre-training workout in, or stay later so that everybody can get their time in. Ah, that must have been something else. Holy cow.
yeah. And then, I mean, you take into consideration that masks, obviously they have to be worn during training, from coaches and players, and that can make, communication as a coach, you're not able to see facial expressions, and really, having to project your voice through a mask. And then it changed to, as coaches, we've been wearing masks with a face shield over the mask. So really, when you're coaching, a lot of what you're saying is projected straight into the face shield. And so it's just been tricky navigating, and interacting with athletes, and not having those normal, you know, coaching relationships, or even tactile cueing, was very limited, because of, not wanting us to touch players unless absolutely, necessary for safety. And so it was, we feel like we're prepared for anything.
I bet you are. I'm thinking about, of course, your Mile High Stadium. That's where the Broncos play, and you're way up in the Rockies where the air is thinner, and you're asked to wear masks and throw on a face shield on top of that, and then go ahead and do your wind sprints or whatever. Let's just do some speed, agility, quickness on the field. It's did the players have to wear the masks while training on the field?
Yeah, um, so let me just to clarify, the players didn't have to wear the face
Oh, just
shield.
coaches.
Just the coaches was
Okay.
the mask plus
Okay.
the face shield. But
Oh,
players did have to wear masks, um, on the field as well as in the weight room. And so during movement sessions, they did have to have masks on, and it
oh.
was definitely, not ideal. Like you said, we're already at a higher altitude, and so, you know, uh, at the end of the day, we wanted to comply with the NFL and do our best, as an organization, and also to try to keep everyone healthy, throughout the season, and not, have COVID, spread across the organization. So we really did have to be very strict, and follow the guidelines.
Yeah, I know that there were teams where it infiltrated, and there was players that had to take a week or two off. How was it with the Broncos? Without naming names or anything, did
Right.
you have some that came down with COVID?
Yeah, I think the only organization in the entire NFL that didn't have a single positive case was the Seattle Seahawks. But every other team at least had one. So I'd say we were amongst the norm within the league, where we had a couple, but we did such a great job with the protocols that in the rare circumstance that we did have a positive test, it didn't spread, you know, across the whole team or across a whole position group. And I think a lot of that was because we were following all the protocols, to a T.
Well, I think the Seahawks are just a bunch of liars. So I'm just kidding.
Right.
I'm just kidding. I rescind that. I think they're a spectacular organization. If they're listening. But so how has it been for you, and being probably one of the few women on the field, definitely the one in the weight room, and how did you earn the respect of your peers? And not that you needed to do it any different than anybody else, but of course we got to talk that this is a male-dominated sport, so there's going to be probably a little something going on. What was it like?
Being the first female coach within the Denver Broncos organization, is an incredible honor, and it's something that I take very seriously, and it's also a huge responsibility, on my end, and it's on the other women that have been given these opportunities. Because if we don't perform and we don't earn the respect, of our colleagues and of our athletes, that's gonna, make it a lot harder for other women in the future, to continue to have these opportunities. And so it's of utmost importance that we are able to do those things and earn respect of not only our colleagues but of the players, and that they consider us, to be a coach, just like they consider any other person, that's a coach. Um, and so I think, I feel like coming in and having the experience in the NBA, even though it's a different sport, already having experience in pro sport and dealing with, you know, male professional athletes, I feel like I was prepared, coming into the NFL. Obviously, it's a different culture, it's a different environment, and there's 4 times as many players whose, respect you have to earn. But I felt, confident coming into it, and I feel like as soon as you show that you're capable of helping them, improve their performance, and you show that you care about them, as people as well. And I also feel like a lot of it has to do with the way you carry yourself and the way that you communicate with them. And once they realize, like, hey, she's a coach, she's going to help me, then it doesn't matter. And I've had zero issues. I've been fortunate with both my time in the NBA as well as in the NFL, where there hasn't been one single issue, with an athlete not being respectful or questioning, me being there. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Ah, fabulous. That was so nice to hear. Yeah, because there's this kind of almost like a thought that people are just waiting for you to
Yeah.
fail so that they can say, see, women don't belong in the NFL. So that's a tremendous kind of almost unspoken burden on your shoulders that you're carrying beyond anybody else. I mean, maybe I'm just making that up, but I don't think that's the case. I think that there's a lot of the fan base that they're scratching
Yeah.
their head going, what's that all about? But you show your worth and every day that you're there, I'm sure. And then you give everybody else permission to do the same, which is fantastic. In this season that you've just gone through, what were some of the things that made you just scratch your head and go, aside from the obvious COVID, like at our dinner table, when we're sitting at the dinner table every night, we talk about the best part of our day, the worst part of our day, what the heck, which is basically what was that all about? What made you go, oh, I had no idea, I didn't see that coming. And then we have also bud, which is like a flower bud, and we look forward to something blossoming in the future. So I'm kind of curious, after this whole season with the Broncos, what was your what the heck, and also what's your bud? What are you looking forward to?
Man, I think the thing that was surprising, but not, I mean, going into the sport of football, that it's a physical sport. But I think for me, it wasn't necessarily a what the heck, but I've had conversations with other coaches on our staff that until you're there at practice and until you're there on an NFL sideline, I don't think you realize how physical of a sport it really is. Like from a fan's perspective, or even if you're someone that follows football consistently. But I feel like until you're actually in the trenches with the guys and you're on the sideline and you're at practice, where you just realize the physicality of the sport, and then kind of what that means from your approach as a practitioner, to help manage that, and keep the guys healthy and doing everything we can do on our end. Um, because hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, everyone knows football is a physical sport, but for me at least, it wasn't until I was on the sideline that you realize, man, you know these guys are, the amount of volume of hits that they're taking, and it's a lot. And so it really, you know, makes you realize, what these guys go through, um, in order to play the game, but then also kind of shines a different light on what we can do, to help them stay healthy enough, to continue to play, throughout the entire season. So
I imagine. And then things you're looking forward to. What's within your career, or on the field, off the field, in the room, where?
yeah, absolutely. So something that actually just got released this week. So when this comes out next week, I believe, there's a campaign with Nike and the NFL that I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, that just launched this week, that myself and the other women of the NFL were all a part of. And it's to raise money and funding through Nike for flag football for girls to be a varsity sport in every single state. And that's something that, truly honored to be part of that initiative. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing that, come to light and providing that, helping provide that opportunity, for girls to play football.
How is that? Are you a spokesperson in collaboration with Nike and the NFL for this?
Yeah, not necessarily a spokesperson, but representing, the Broncos organization. And um, on on the website, um, through Nike, there's a link that anyone can go to and vote for to have flag football approved. And then Nike is going to donate $100,000, as well as uniforms, all the equipment that's necessary to every state that approves flag football to get funded for girls. And so, myself and the other women of the NFL, we are on, there's a virtual combine, so to speak, on 11online.com, and it takes girls through different drills. Like, I go through a dynamic warm up segment on there, and some of the other coaches go through football specific drills, and another strength and conditioning coach within the league goes through some movements in the weight room. So there's educational content that we put together, and then we're also hopefully just faces to help inspire, the next generation of girls that they can get involved in the sport of football.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wow.
So
No, I hadn't heard of that. So that's a first for me. And how exciting is that? I mean, just to open it up, that is great. Seeing that other sports have closed down or seeming to, that doors can open, especially in the world of football. Wow. And that kicks off when, do you say?
So it just launched this like in the last couple of days. So when this episode releases, it'll be within the last week. And I'll send you the link to it.
Beautiful.
So I'm really excited just to watch the progress with that. And I'm hopeful that flag football will be funded, in numerous states, if not every state. And aside from that, I'm just hopeful for the future and hope to continue this journey, within the NFL, and long term, do hope to become a head strength and conditioning coach, within the National Football League. So
Yeah, that's marvelous. Okay, well, we'll definitely put all of the links in the description, everything with this podcast, so people can check it out. And if they've got some young female athletes that are looking to do something for the fall semester in school, then they're going to have something to definitely look forward to. Now, within the Broncos organization, um, first of all, how do you like living in Denver? I mean, it
yeah,
sounds like you're San Diego. I mean, California girl almost. Where did you grow up? What town did you grow up in?
I'm from Phoenix, Arizona originally.
Oh man, so you don't know anything about the snow. What's the snow like? Are you into skiing?
I haven't been yet, but during the off season, so now that we're in the off season, rather, I definitely want to ski. I want to learn how to snowboard. I do want to take advantage of all the activities that are at my fingertips that I'm not used to having available. So
Oh yeah, well you'll be ruined. It's once you're on it, forget about it. But I'm glad you bring up the off season because I'm curious from a strength conditioning perspective. What happens in your off season? Obviously, there's some just some downtime, but then when the athletes they can't report back until summer camp. But I imagine you're putting programs together for the off season for them. Is that correct?
yeah, so in a typical off season, when COVID is not involved, that's kind of the format and the schedule is, there's some downtime, and then there are usually workouts towards the end of March, early April, that guys can actually report back to the facility for, um, prior to training camp in the summer. So again, that's in a typical year. Last season, those were canceled because it was just, at the start of COVID during that time. And this year, we're still kind of waiting to hear if those are going to get approved or if everything is going to have to be done virtually, in the meantime until training camp. So we should be finding that out relatively soon. But like you said, we did put together an off-season training program that all of our guys have, with everything from movement to actual lifting sessions, recovery strategies, everything in between, where if they are training on their own, or at a facility, wherever they're spending their time in the off season, they can still follow our program that we put together for them.
And is that based on the individual athlete, or is it position based? Like, here's all what the running back should be doing, or what?
Yeah, it's not individualized per player, but it is positional. So in there, let's say during a movement session, the work for certain positions are gonna be different than what we're recommending for the other positions. So it is based off of needs for particular positions and position groups.
And when it comes to positions and in the in season or preseason, or even I'll say the postseason conditioning too, not off season, but when you guys make it to the playoffs, which the Broncos typically do more often than not. Um, when it comes to conditioning like that, out of all those positions, which positions would you say are the most challenging to create programs for?
To be transparent with you, I don't really think there's one that jumps out, in particular, like, man, that position is really challenging. I think that, like you were saying earlier in the episode, that the positions are so different, that they're all, challenging in their own ways, just looking at what characteristics, and qualities that they each need to have, independently from others. So I think it's a good challenge, as a professional, to really kind of get you, it's a good test, as a professional, to say, hey, are you able, to program for all these different positions, and is there an area where it's not as clear, and where it's good, to have, and most NFL teams have a large strength and conditioning staff, where maybe someone on your staff specializes, working with a certain group of guys, or being able to, discuss these things, amongst, a group of qualified individuals. So
Well, I imagine you pair up certain positions with one another when it comes to strength conditioning programs, like the defensive lineman and the offensive lineman. That's kind of basically compatible when you got wide receivers and the corners, as well as the defensive backs, like the safeties, secondaries. I imagine, are they in the same kind of category of workouts?
yeah, there's definitely similar movement qualities, amongst positions, where, like you said, linemen, and for example, are going to have a lot of similarities, whether they're offensive or defensive linemen. So that definitely makes it easier, on us as well.
Yes. Now, are there any kind of go-to pieces of equipment, aside from the typical squat rack, that the Broncos have been really utilizing for strength conditioning?
I mean, not really one thing in particular. We keep things simple. We're definitely not, the type to try to use, the fancy, let's, things you see online, and, trying to come up with the latest and greatest. But, Coach Lando is definitely, more keep things simple and basic, and let's be efficient, with our time when we're in the weight room. So I feel like, from a equipment standpoint, one thing that has been very helpful, especially with COVID, is we do use power block dumbbells.
Yep.
So having power blocks, and having the guys able to have their own set of dumbbells, that are just theirs during a workout, and able to interchange, all the way up, to 120 pounds, in some cases, where, if we didn't have those, and we just had, a couple sets of each weight, that would have been a problem to deal with. So, I know that that's one thing that really helped us during COVID, as far as equipment goes.
And has COVID changed the calendar for the upcoming season in terms of, probably not the combine, but training camp, or anything like that?
Yeah, so we're still waiting to hear, what's going to happen moving forward. So hopefully we'll find out relatively soon.
Okay. And then during your off season, I imagine you're still working in the Broncos
Yeah.
organization, but it's just that it seems like it's not as intense, obviously, as that when you're in season. But what are some of the things that you'll do now that you're in the off season compared to when the season begins?
Yeah, so right now in the off season, we are at the facility, like you mentioned, but there are certain guidelines and limitations from the NFL where there are only a certain number of athletes that are allowed to be at the facility right now. And some of that is due to a combination of COVID restrictions as well as just rules that are always there during a typical NFL offseason. So right now, we have all of our guys that are currently on a return to play program coming back from any sort of injury that are allowed to be at the facility, going through treatment with athletic training and our physical therapists, and then they're able to come into the weight room and work with us. So right now we're seeing all those guys, all the return to play guys, and then there are also rules where players that are in market, so they're staying in town during the off season, they're allowed to come into the facility with certain restrictions. So we are seeing a few of those guys as well, but those are more hands off where we're not really coaching them. Um, they're allowed to use the facility within a limited capacity, to go through a suggested, workout from the off-season packet that we gave them.
Very cool. And now, of course, strength conditioning coaches, the five of you, you work in concert with other departments, we'll say, or other professionals that help to support the Broncos organization, such as I'm imagining there's probably a team dietitian or nutritionists that are overseeing the eating profile or supplementations and all those things. But out of all the professionals that make up this organization, personally speaking, Emily, what ones are the most engaging or the most fun or the most exciting ones to work with?
Oh man,
I'm not
I feel
going to
like
questions here. I just want to know the nuts and bolts here.
I mean, I do value each and every department within our organization, and
Safe answer, but come on, let's get down to it.
but I really do, and I think that one of the biggest, the best way, to achieve success as an organization, regardless of what sport you're in, and this can apply, in the professional or the collegiate setting, is to truly operate as a team within the organization and not operate in silos where, strength coaches stick to themselves, athletic training sticks to themselves, nutrition sticks to themselves, but really as a whole performance department, working collectively as a team is going to help, our organization, win, but also keep our players healthy and guide them towards success. So I really enjoy working with everyone, and I'm not trying to give a safe answer, but I do feel like one thing that we do really well as an organization is that we all collaborate, between departments, and that's something that I'm really appreciative for. So
Nice. That's really nice. And then within the league itself, I imagine Combine Week, you must get together with other strength conditioning coaches from other teams. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you had an association of some sort, or at least a conference while the combine's going on. Is that true?
So typically, I believe that's what happens. This year, the combine has changed to, virtual, so there's not going to be a normal combine this year, unfortunately. But this is obviously, my first NFL season. But from what I've been told, in a typical year, when the strength coaches are at the combine, that they typically get together, meet, talk shop, network, all those things. So hopefully something to look forward to in the future.
Well, that would be nice. And well, congratulations on your rookie year. And you've gone through it with, sounds like, with flying colors. And now the seasoned veteran will start off the 21-22 season. I could talk for a whole bunch more with you, but I know we're out of time, and you've got a whole bunch of snowboarding lessons to get underway, I'm sure. But Emily, this has been a blast, and I will definitely be a promotional tool for anything else that comes your way in the world of young girls in sports, flag football, or anything else. Please let me know, and we'll put it on the channel as well. But this has been a blast. I really hope you had a good time too.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on and taking the time. It's been an honor to be on the podcast, and it was great to meet you virtually. So
Well, who knows? Maybe sometime when Denver opens up a little bit and travel is gone, then I've got some friends just outside of Denver and Fort Collins, and there's always a snowbird
nice.
waiting for me. We'll get up on the slopes.
Perfect.
And that's a wrap for another episode of the Zelos podcast. I'd like to thank Emily Zaler and the Denver Broncos organization. If you enjoyed this episode, which I certainly hope you did, make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you next week.